Hello, class, and welcome to This Week in Native American and Substance Abuse. This week, we will be looking at addiction through a neuroscience lens. Of course, this course is not really all that strong in biology, but we do need to touch on some of the biological and neuroscience perspectives of addiction because it ties in very strongly with our understanding of Native American experience of substance abuse. So this week we will focus on neuroscience and addiction. We're going to approach it very carefully through a cultural and ethical lens, of course. And the thing about neuroscience is that it offers powerful insights into how addiction develops and how recovery occurs. However, brain-based explanations can become harmful if they are too reductionistic. So when we are dealing with people, we also need to avoid framing addiction as a permanently damaged brain. Yes, there can be brain damage, but we need to understand that there can be healing and a restoration of just practical function as well. So from the cultural perspective, we need to understand that healing and restoration of balance is possible from the neuroscience perspective. We should be reminded that the brain is, while limited, does have some plastic and adaptive capabilities. And from the addiction science, to understand that recovery is a process and there are many stages to that process. And it's a lifelong process. So we're going to dive into this, and hopefully you'll understand by the end that support that brings dignity and hope is the best approach, even from the neuroscience perspective. So this lecture, we're going to start off with a story, as we actually always do, and then we'll dive into three main themes. The first we'll examine is how addiction affects some specific key brain systems. Second, we'll focus on neuroplasticity and the brain's capacity to change, and then we'll explore how culture and relationship and meaning influence brain regulation. And throughout this lecture, we'll integrate our Dakota understanding of balance and how the brain responds to lived experiences and try to avoid some of the deterministic language that often can come about. Recovery really does involve learning and regulation. It's not so much about repair of a broken machine. And so we just need to kind of keep that in mind as we move forward. Everybody has their own abilities, and we need to kind of work with people in their own abilities. So I want to introduce you today to a researcher that is very much along the lines of the researcher that we had last week. This is Bruce McEwen, who's a neuroscientist, and his work has reshaped really our understanding of stress in the brain. He introduced a concept called the allostatic load, which basically says that, how much chronic stress are we carrying, and how does the wear on our biological systems. And his research has demonstrated that the brain changes in response to experience. Importantly, these changes can in many ways be reversible. Now, McEwen here emphasizes that adaptation and thinks of it in terms of adaptation rather than damage. And so if you take this from and use some trauma-informed care and understand it from that perspective, his research really aligns well with indigenous understandings of imbalance, of being thrown into imbalance by the allostatic load that we carry, the stresses, the chronic stresses that we carry. And that goes a long ways to help us understand addiction vulnerability under chronic stress. So his legacy supports compassionate neuroscience. His legacy supports compassionate, full community care of people suffering from substance abuse disorders. Because it takes belonging, it takes calm, caring relationships, it takes attachment, it takes a reduced sense of stress in order for healing to occur. Now, when we think of addiction, addiction itself involves changes in brain systems related to things like learning and motivation. There is part of your brain called the nucleus accumbens that tells you what you like. And that's how you make your choices. A lot of what you do, you choose because you like it. You want it, and that's why you choose it. Very rarely do we choose something we don't want. And substances, unfortunately, strongly activate that reward pathway system. And these pathways have been evolved to support survival learning. But under repeated exposure, our brain learning becomes biased towards substance-related cues. It's like our brain is being tricked. It's not a moral failure. It's a very predictable learning process. But the thing is, the only thing that can stop it is our frontal lobe considering the consequences. But here's the problem. Stress amplifies the slowing down of your frontal lobe. So if you're under stress, you're not going to think through things clearly. And if you're not going to think through things clearly, what's the next system? The next system in your decision-making process is not what are the consequences, it is what do I like? And that is where the addiction comes. So we need to understand that stress amplifies these effects. So when we understand all of that, we can give care to the person, not stigma. It helps us to reframe addiction as adaptation, while in many ways very, very maladaptive, but it's using a system that we have that was supposed to help us to survive. Now, I mentioned the part of the brain called the nucleus accumbens. It runs on dopamine, and dopamine is the chemical that tells us what we like. Dopamine, though, is often misunderstood as a pleasure chemical. In reality, it signals importance and learning. But substances hijack this learning system. And so this leads to strong habit formation. And so there is a truth of habit in addiction. But then there's also environmental cues that become very powerful triggers. You know, if you're in a social setting, if you're sitting down in a certain place, that becomes a cue, becomes a trigger. And so neuroscience, when you understand all of this, can help you to understand why cravings are learned anticipation. And in so doing, then, we can recognize the power of habit, but also understand that healing is possible. Healing requires new learning. It's not about punishment. It's about understanding and supporting relapse prevention and developing new skills. And of course, stress is a big part of this. Stress systems play a very central role in addiction. Chronic stress dysregulates your emotional control. That HPA axis becomes overactive. Substances can temporarily dampen stress responses. And so sometimes we use substances to manage our stress. But the problem is that they also hijack our stress system. So this reinforces use under distress. And neuroscience confirms that stress is a relapse risk. So one of the values of Dakota practices for addiction recovery is targeting regulation, is having ceremony and rhythm and connection that is calm. And all of that calms that stress system. So there you see that science and culture converge. And this becomes a great model for treatment. Now, I want to also kind of just remind you a little bit about neuroplasticity. This refers to the brain's ability to reorganize itself. Learning reshapes neural pathways throughout our life, and addiction-related changes don't have to be permanent. Recovery involves forming new regulatory patterns. And this, of course, is going to require time. It's going to require supportive environments. It's going to require safety and consistency. But all of these things promote plasticity. Walking too is extremely important in plasticity. For some reason, when you're walking a lot and learning, that is super effective in healing and reworking the neuroplasticity of your brain. So, being mindful of the Dakota healing practices that support regulation naturally and support plasticity helps us to move beyond that fatalistic narrative, because human brains develop within relationships. And so we also need to always be mindful of attachments and feeling like we belong to someone, because most of what we learn, we actually just catch from other people in relationships. It isn't so much sitting down and reading and studying things, although that's very important for certain types of learning and for certain parts of your brain. But a lot of what we do is through attachments and regulation. So attachment experiences shape our regulation systems. So when you disrupt attachment, that increases vulnerability to addiction. Supportive relationships promote recovery. Social neuroscience is something that confirms this. Dakota kinship systems historically support regulation. Colonization disrupted lives has disrupted these systems for generations of people. And so we need to be very conscious with our healing to restore relational safety, to learn to talk with each other slowly, calmly, in a caring way, because that promotes healing. Yelling never promotes healing. Treating with connection is important. Now, I want to just kind of explore a little bit of some definitions, and then we'll close out for this lecture. Neuroplasticity. That's really about adaptability. It's our brain being adaptable. What is allostatic load? That really is what is the chronic stress that we are carrying within our bodies. And dopamine. Dopamine is important for learning. It's how we make choices and how we learn to make choices. It isn't just about pleasure, it's about what we like, and we tend to choose what we like. And then finally, neuroplasticity means the brain adapts and can reorganize itself. So, in closing, hope you get from this lecture that neuroscience really does deepen our understanding of addiction. That we can't just reduce people to their brains, but to their whole experience. But neuroscience helps us to give some insight into how the whole human experience works together to increase or decrease addiction risk. Things like stress, like learning, like environment, like plasticity. And so when we come to Dakota cultural practices for support and for creating community and relationships and caring for people, we can understand why those things are helpful and why they are important. They reduce the allostatic load. They help to promote brain plasticity. They help to increase the power of our frontal lobe to make better decisions and to rewire our pleasure systems so that we can decide better what it is that we want to do and what we're going to choose. Hope you enjoyed this lecture, and I will see you next week. You take care. Bye-bye.